The air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of joy you can only find at a wedding. It was a summer evening, and the setting was perfect. My wife, Rachel, and I had been looking forward to this for months. Our friends Matt and Sarah were finally tying the knot, and their wedding felt more like a reunion than just another ceremony. Rachel and I had been together for nearly a decade now, married for 7. As I looked at her laughing and dancing with some of our friends, I couldn't help but smile. She looked stunning, her long hair pinned up in soft waves, her smile bright in the glow of the reception lights. She was the love of my life, and I felt a swell of pride just being with her. It had been a rough year for us though. Between my job picking up in intensity and Rachel's long hours at the hospital, we'd barely had time to talk, let alone connect the way we used to. But tonight was about forgetting all of that, about enjoying the company of friends and celebrating love. Watching Rachel dance and laugh, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was ready to put in the effort to rekindle that spark between us, but little did I know that night was about to change everything. We moved from the reception area to the bar outside, where the warm night air was filled with the smell of lavender and wine. I had just ordered another round of drinks for us when I noticed Rachel deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, athletic, a bit older than me. He had that easy, confident smile of someone who knew how to charm. I shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe he was one of Matt's friends from college or someone she'd met at work. Rachel was friendly, and she often talked with new people easily, her charisma drawing people in naturally. Still, something about their interaction tugged at my attention. They were laughing, standing just a little too close. A part of me felt a hint of jealousy, but I pushed it down. After all, it was a wedding. People were bound to be a little more lively and social than usual. Later, Rachel came over, glowing from the night's excitement. She threw her arms around me, leaning in close as we swayed to the music. I felt her kiss on my cheek, the familiar softness of her lips bringing back memories of when we'd first started dating. "Hey, babe," she said, slightly breathless. "Isn't this night perfect?" She seemed happy, carefree in a way I hadn't seen in months. I wanted to hold on to that moment, to believe that this was the start of something new for us. But that man from earlier kept popping up in my peripheral vision. When Rachel would leave to grab a drink or talk with some friends, I noticed him lingering nearby, his eyes following her every move. Every time I thought I'd convinced myself it was nothing, I'd catch sight of him again, his attention on her a little too focused for my liking. I brushed it off. We were here to celebrate Matt and Sarah. Rachel would never do anything to hurt me, I told myself. This was just my own insecurity surfacing after all the stress we'd been through. I wrapped my arm around her and whispered, "I'm glad we're here together. We needed this." She nodded, her smile softening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the night progressed, Rachel and I mingled with our friends, enjoying the laughter and shared stories. But as we went back to the dance floor, I caught sight of that same guy again. He was standing by the bar, talking to another friend of ours, but his eyes kept flicking toward us. He seemed to be watching Rachel intently. I wanted to shake the feeling that was creeping over me, so I told myself I was being paranoid and tried to enjoy the night. Rachel seemed to notice my mood shifting. She leaned in close, her voice soft and full of warmth. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, concern in her eyes. Yeah, just tired, I guess," I replied, trying to shake off my unease. "Let's go outside then," she suggested, squeezing my hand. "Get some air." She led me through the crowded room, weaving through guests until we reached the patio, lit with strings of warm lights. The garden was quiet, and for a moment I felt relieved, just the two of us, away from the noise and crowd. As we walked further down the garden path, I noticed Rachel glancing back toward the reception area. I followed her gaze, and there he was again. The same guy, his eyes following us. He noticed me looking and quickly turned away, but my suspicions flared back up. I opened my mouth to ask who he was, but Rachel beat me to it. "Remember when I told you I'd run into an old friend from college? That's him. she said, her voice casual. His name's Mark. We used to study together, but I haven't seen him in years. I nodded slowly, trying to mask my unease. She continued, we caught up for a bit, but don't worry, I'm here with you tonight. She reached for my hand, her eyes reassuring. Promise. With that, I felt the tension ease a little. Maybe I really was overthinking it. After all, Rachel had always been loyal. Why would she jeopardize our marriage over a chance encounter? The evening went on, and I did my best to focus on enjoying myself. We laughed, danced, and even stole a few kisses under the string lights, my doubts gradually dissolving into the night air. As we returned inside to say goodbye to the bride and groom, Rachel leaned in to give me a kiss, her smile bright and carefree. I'll just be a minute, she said, disappearing toward the back hall where the restrooms were. I waited by the door, scrolling through my phone, making small talk with a few friends passing by. I looked up every few moments, hoping to catch sight of her, but as the minutes ticked by, she didn't return. Just as I started to wonder if she'd run into someone and gotten sidetracked, a friend walked up, concern on her face. Hey, have you seen Rachel? I thought I saw her going toward the garden with that guy. Mark? My heart dropped. I tried to keep my voice steady, even though I felt panic starting to rise. She's probably just saying goodbye or something. But the words tasted like a lie. My chest tightened as I followed the direction my friend had pointed, weaving back through the reception area. The air suddenly felt thick and stifling, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. Just as I was about to reach the back exit, I froze. Through the thin glass of the door, I saw them. Rachel and Mark, standing together in the shadowy garden, away from the guests. They were close, so close that I could see Rachel's face lit by the soft glow of the garden lights, her eyes looking up at him with an expression I hadn't seen in years. She laughed, her hand reaching out to touch his arm in that familiar, intimate way I thought was reserved just for me. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced. I told myself it was nothing, just two old friends catching up. But as I watched, Mark leaned in closer, his hand moving to rest on her shoulder, then tracing down her arm, and Rachel didn't pull away. My stomach twisted painfully. I felt rooted to the spot. Part of me wanting to burst through the door and confront them, part of me terrified of what I might see up close. Then, just as quickly as it had happened, she took a step back, laughing nervously, her hand covering her mouth. Whatever was happening between them, it wasn't innocent, not anymore. I turned and walked away, the laughter and music fading as I moved further into the reception hall. Back inside, the air was buzzing with voices and music, but it all sounded muffled, like I was underwater. I made my way through the crowd in a daze, heading for the bar to clear my mind. I felt my hands shaking as I poured myself a drink, trying to keep my face neutral, but my thoughts were a storm. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, their faces close, her hand on his arm. My stomach churned and I fought to keep my composure. Just as I was about to finish my drink, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Rachel, her face flushed and smiling, as if nothing had happened. Hey, sorry, I ran into a few friends, she said, her voice bright. I didn't mean to keep you waiting. I looked at her, trying to read the expression on her face. She looked like she was enjoying herself, carefree and happy. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing, if maybe my jealousy was just playing tricks on me. But then I thought of how close they'd been, the way she'd touched him, the way he'd looked at her. Who are you out there with? I asked, keeping my voice as even as possible. Her smile faltered for a split second. Just some friends, she said quickly, her tone casual. Why? I saw you with Mark, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Looked like you two were pretty close. She raised an eyebrow, a hint of irritation flashing across her face. Oh, come on, she said, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. We were just catching up. It's been years since we last saw each other. I wanted to believe her, but something in her tone was too dismissive, too quick. You were out there for a long time, I pressed, feeling my heartbeat quicken. It didn't look like just small talk. She sighed, crossing her arms defensively. Really? You're getting jealous over a quick conversation with an old friend. I could feel my frustration building, but I didn't want to make a scene here. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, Rachel. I saw how close you two were. It looked like more than just friendly catching up. She rolled her eyes, her tone sharp. You know, it's not fair to assume things based on a glance. He's married, for crying out loud. We were talking about our lives, that's all. Something in her voice stung, but I nodded, trying to let it go. I didn't want to fight with her, not tonight. I forced a smile, putting an arm around her waist. Okay, I said, deciding to drop it. Let's just enjoy the night. But her body was stiff, her smile forced. You know, she said after a pause, her tone softer. You don't need to worry. I'm here with you. Always. The words were meant to be comforting, but they only deepened the unease gnawing at me. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and something about the way she looked at me was different, like there was a wall between us that I hadn't noticed before. We returned to the dance floor, but the distance between us felt like it had grown a mile wide. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the image of her and Mark in the garden, his hand on her arm, her laughter, that look in her eyes. It replayed over and over in my mind, each time chipping away at my trust. And as we drove home, Rachel leaning her head against the window, silent and thoughtful, I felt the bitter sting of suspicion starting to take root. But I still didn't know just how deep this was going to go, or that it had already gone far beyond what I could imagine. The following week was a strange one. Rachel seemed distracted, as though she was constantly miles away in her mind. When I tried to ask her about it, she brushed it off, saying she was just tired from work. Her explanations felt thin, but I decided not to push it. Part of me was afraid of what I might find if I did. Then one night, I came home late after a long day at the office. Rachel was already asleep, her phone on the nightstand buzzing softly with a notification. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the memory of that night at the wedding, or just an overwhelming need to know the truth. But I found myself reaching for her phone. She always kept it unlocked, trusting me completely, as I had trusted her. At first, I saw the usual string of notifications, work emails, group texts with her friends. I almost put it down, feeling a pang of guilt, but then I saw a name that made my heart stop. Mark. The message was recent, from just a few minutes ago. My hands trembled as I opened it, and as I scrolled, the contents of their conversation unfolded before me. It started with casual catch-ups, talking about the wedding, reminiscing about their college days, but the tone shifted quickly. His texts became more personal, flirtatious, and Rachel responded in kind. There were mentions of missing our talks and thinking about you, the kind of things that went beyond friendly banter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might wake her, and then I found it, the line that sent a chill down my spine. Last week felt like a dream. I keep replaying it in my mind. Her response came shortly after. Me too. But we can't let this get out of hand. It's too risky. I felt my stomach churn as the reality sank in. That night at the wedding, when I had seen them in the garden, it hadn't just been my imagination. Something had happened between them. Something she had been hiding from me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My mind raced through every moment from that night. The way she had laughed with him, touched his arm, the secrecy in her expression. It all made sense now. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind reeling. Eventually, I put her phone back on the nightstand, careful not to make a sound. I lay beside her, my heart heavy and aching. In the darkness, I watched her sleep, wondering how I had missed it all, wondering what I would say, or if I would even say anything at all. The next morning, I could barely look at her. She was cheerful, acting as if nothing was wrong. I forced a smile, pretending everything was fine, but inside, I was shattered. She didn't seem to notice my mood, or if she did, she brushed it off. But I couldn't leave it alone. The suspicion was eating me alive, consuming every thought. I decided I needed more. I couldn't just confront her with a few text messages. She'd deny it, twist it, maybe even accuse me of snooping. I needed to know the full truth, And so, against everything I believed in, I found myself logging into her email that night, searching for anything that could confirm what I'd seen. It didn't take long. Buried in her email was a reservation confirmation for a hotel room, dated 2 days after the wedding, a hotel in a city 2 hours away, one I knew she had visited for work. But now I saw it for what it was. A cover. She hadn't gone for work. She'd gone to meet him. The weight of the betrayal hit me full force. It was real. She hadn't just crossed a line. She had obliterated it. I spent the following days in a fog, my mind replaying every text, every stolen glance I'd seen between Rachel and Mark. I kept coming back to one question. Why? Why had she done it? Our life had been, if not perfect, then good. We'd been happy, or so I thought. I considered confronting her, but I didn't have the words. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump but terrified of what would happen if I did. Then, one evening, I came home to find Rachel waiting for me in the living room, her face pale and drawn. She looked up when I walked in, and immediately I knew something was wrong. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely a whisper. My heart sank. I'd been preparing myself for this moment, rehearsing how I'd confront her, how I'd demand answers. But now, faced with the reality, I was numb. She took a shaky breath and began, "There's something I need to tell you. It's about Mark." I waited, my heart pounding, but she seemed to struggle with the words. "That night at the wedding. After you and I had an argument, I ran into him, and we ended up talking. We were just reminiscing. But things got out of hand." Her words hung in the air, each one cutting deeper than the last. She paused, looking down, unable to meet my eyes. I thought it was harmless, but after the wedding, we kept talking. He was persistent, and I let things go too far. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body tense. "So you just slipped into an affair?" I asked, my voice hollow. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to understand. Mark, he reached out to me at a low point, and I was vulnerable. I should have stopped it. I should have been stronger, but I didn't." Her voice broke, and for a moment she seemed as devastated as I felt. "I know I've betrayed you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I can't keep lying to you." I was silent, the weight of her confession pressing down on me, suffocating. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but I never thought it would feel like this. So hollow, so final. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "What did you think was going to happen, Rachel? That I'd just accept this?" She looked down, wiping her eyes. "No, I just needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand that I do love you, but I've lost myself somewhere along the way. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I guess he filled that void. But it was a mistake, one I'll regret forever." There was a long silence as I grappled with her words. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to let this be a horrible mistake we could somehow overcome. But the betrayal was too deep, the pain too raw. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the hurt and anger overwhelming. "I think you should go," I said finally, my voice barely steady. "I need time, space, to figure out what I want. If this is even something I can get past." She nodded, her face a mix of sorrow and resignation. She gathered her things in silence, and within an hour she was gone. I was left standing alone in the empty house, the echoes of her confession still ringing in my ears. In the days that followed, I was a wreck. Friends and family noticed the change, and I deflected their questions, unwilling to relive the pain. I spent hours staring at my phone, half expecting Rachel to call, to say something that would make it all make sense. But the silence was unbroken. Then, a week later, I received a text from Mark. My hands shook as I opened it, bracing myself for whatever he had to say. "I'm sorry for everything, man," the message read. I didn't mean to ruin your life. Things got out of hand. I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't reply. There was nothing he could say that would undo the damage he'd done. But then, a few days later, I got a message from Rachel. It was a single sentence. "I need to tell you something." I hesitated, but finally I agreed to meet her, hoping for some kind of closure. When we met, she looked different, worn, tired, a shadow of the woman I'd once loved. She took a deep breath, her eyes full of regret. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said, her voice shaky. "I found out I'm pregnant." I felt my chest tighten, my mind reeling. "Is it?" I couldn't finish the sentence, the words too painful to say. She looked down, her face crumbling. "I don't know." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. It was a nightmare and I couldn't wake up. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the weight of her betrayal too heavy to bear. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone. I knew that whatever happened, whatever the future held, the life I'd once known was gone forever, and that was it. A single mistake, one night at a wedding, had shattered everything. I'd never know if the child was mine or his, and part of me wasn't sure if I wanted to. But as painful as it was, I knew I'd survive, because for the first time, I realized that I deserved someone who would choose me every single day, just as I had chosen her. And that, finally, was enough.